Hello and welcome to this UKFPO webinar about the revised UK Foundation Programme curriculum. I'd like to welcome you whether you're watching live or watching the recording. If you are watching live, there's the opportunity to ask the panel questions via the Q&A tab on the Teams meeting here. The panel consists of Dr. Fiona Cameron, Foundation School Director in Scotland and the Academy of Medical Royal College's Foundation Programme Committee Chair. She is going to explain about the revision of the curriculum. We've got Dr. Kavita Malhi, F2 doctor, and who has been working with us in the UKFPO as a fellow for the last year. And she's going to give some reflections about the revised curriculum from the point of view of a foundation doctor. And Mr. Jack Fairhall, who's a medical education manager in the Northwest. Jack is going to talk about some reflections from the point of view of medical education teams. The foundation programme is now 21 years old, and with the first curriculum being introduced in 2005, when there were nearly 200 outcomes that every foundation doctor had to have signed off. Over the years, the curriculum has iterated with new versions due to both changes in educational practice and also changes in medical practice, as it's very important that the UK Foundation Programme curriculum reflects the needs of patients, of doctors, and the wider health services across the 4 UK nations. The last revision of the curriculum was in 2021, led by Dr. Tony Choules, and it made a lot of significant changes which have been widely celebrated across the foundation programme, with improvements in foundation programme doctor reflection, in fewer outcomes needed to be signed off, and a wider range of evidence that can be used for those signing off. Our approach this time is, rather than rewriting the curriculum, to revise that 2021 curriculum instead. And Fiona is now going to explain what this entails.
So I'm Fiona Cameron. I am the Foundation School Director in Scotland and Chair of the Academy's Foundation Programme Committee. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you about the curriculum update. As Mike Masding has just said, this is an update to the current 2021 curriculum. And I'm going to just say up front, the good thing for those of you who are listening, whether you're a foundation doctor or an educator or a supervisor, then there are no new assessments, there is no increased workload, and you're not going to have to do any extra activity. So that's going to say that up front before you start to think, when is she going to say something that we need to do? So can I have the next slide, please, James? Thank you. Okay, so this is a revision. This is not a new curriculum. And the implications of that are that from August 2026, i.e. in about a month's time, all foundation doctors, whether they're F1, F2, out of sync, will be following this revised curriculum. And I think that's important for everyone to know. So it's not a case of when will I move on to this curriculum, is when, is because it's not a new curriculum, that everybody will be following this revision from August 2026. Next slide, please. So what's not changed? So this is from the 2021 curriculum. I've taken this slide directly, but added in one thing that you probably noticed. So with the 2021 curriculum, the patient is at the centre. And there's a real focus on physical, mental, and social health and how they all link together. What we've added for the 2026 curriculum update is patient safety. Now, patient safety was always in the curriculum. Patient safety is not a new thing, as you all know, but it wasn't really highlighted. And what we have done is we have put patient safety right up the core of everything that a foundation doctor does. It's not controversial. There's nobody going to argue that patient safety is not what we're here to achieve. Nothing will change in terms of where our foundation doctors are delivering their care. They're both in primary, community care, acute and hospital environments, primary, secondary care, mental health, and also areas where we're looking at health promotion. So no one is going to have to do any different jobs. Everything will remain the same. However, throughout everything that we do as doctors, we will be thinking about how to keep the patient safe, how to look after them carefully and safely. And that's really just the direction of travel of our curriculum update. Can I have the next slide, please, James? So again, this is not new. So as Mike Masding has just said, in the very first curriculum, there were over 200 things that foundation doctors had to get signed off. We have now cut that down significantly with the 2021 curriculum and also the 2016 curriculum before that. But we now have 13 professional capabilities, and all in which are separated into the higher level outcomes. And I'm not going to read them all out to you. You're familiar with all of these. These haven't changed. What has changed in some of these, now I'll demonstrate some of that to you later on, is underneath each of these FPCs, we are focusing on patient safety. So there might be things like clinical prioritization, so being able to look after a deteriorating patient and prioritise their care to keep the patient safe. When you're thinking about sort of sharing the vision, fitness to practice, why do we have this? This is looking at things like handover, feedback. How do we communicate? All of these things are to keep the patient safe. So I'm going to talk about them in a bit more detail later on, but really just want to say that nothing has changed. This is the same. It's just that the evidence that the foundation doctor will be using will have the same outcomes, but also thinking about why they're doing it and how that is contributing to a safe clinical care for our patients. Can I have the next slide, please? Again, this is taken from the previous slide set for the 2021 curriculum, and it's really just to remind everyone of how we got here, why we're doing what we're doing. And Miller's pyramid is it forms the basis of how we develop our curricula and how we think about medical education. So everyone has to know stuff. We have to know our medical knowledge. We have to think about how we're going to apply that. We're going to show how we apply that through simulation. And then at the end of the day, we're actually doing it. We're actually looking after patients. We're looking after them, caring for them. And then through our evidence, through SLEs, and our other feedback, then we show that we actually can do the job demonstrating all of this. So again, nothing has changed. This is probably not going to change in the future for some significant period of time because this is well established and works. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background of where we are. So the curriculum sits within the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. This committee, which has representation from all of the Royal Colleges. It has foundation doctor representative, resident doctor representatives, and representatives from the employers. And this curriculum is reviewed regularly. And we get feedback from stakeholders, and we need to make sure that our curriculum is future-proof. And we have a rapidly developing healthcare system, and it's complex. As we all know, it's a complex healthcare system. Our patients are getting older, our patients are getting more complex, more multi-morbid. So we really need to think about how we're going to ensure that our doctors of the future, where our wonderful foundation doctors are going to be working in this healthcare system, and that they care for the patients safely, and that they're going to be the ones developing healthcare and developing healthcare systems in the future. Our population health is obviously changing. As I said, we've got complex multimorbidities, we have an aging population, and we have a lot of health inequalities in all four nations of the UK. We need to also think of everything that we do now. We need to think about the sustainability, and we're talking about healthcare sustainability. How practical is it, for example, to bring people back to the clinics all the time? And we also think we need to think about the environment. We've just had a big heat wave. We're all thinking about the environment, and everything that we should be doing should be thinking about, is this environmentally sustainable? Is this something that we should be doing? So I'm not suggesting that everyone has to do a sustainability project. I'm just suggesting that everyone needs to have a think about the environment when they're developing things. The other thing that we were advised to do is that we need to widen the scope of our curriculum, and we need to recognise that foundation doctors care for people of all ages, including children and young people. The other thing that we've had to do, and this is because the GMC have updated their wording, and rather than talking about differential attainment, we talk now more about fairer training pathways. So this work has been being developed through the Academy's Foundation Programme Committee, and I'm very grateful to everyone on that committee for the support that they have given me in writing this updated curriculum. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so we took information from government, from the GMC, from the Academy, stakeholders, and we particularly thought about the Darcy report, the blood transfusion inquiry, which affects all 4 nations, and we've tried to keep a balanced approach. This is a generalist curriculum, and in fact, we have now got a statement within the curriculum to say that this is a generalist curriculum. Before it was a curriculum to prepare foundation doctors for working in any specialty, but actually now we've got some wording to actually highlight that this is a generalist curriculum. Generally, we're thinking about doctors having more generalist skills and being less super specialised at an early stage. So generalist skills are really, really important. And they should be achievable by all our foundation doctors with the necessary adjustments that they may need to achieve that. And I'm not going to talk about reasonable adjustments in this at all. That's something separate. But the curriculum should be achievable by all, with some adjustments, which is appropriate. Put this in bold: no increase in workload for foundation doctors or trainers. I'm probably going to say that a few times, because we're not going to ask for additional evidence. We're not going to ask for different evidence. It's just going to be a different way of thinking about what we're delivering. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so we have the patient safety and learning assessment strategy. So the patient safety is going to run as a thread through all aspects of the curriculum. And the evidence needs to be signposted on the e-portfolio, either through HORAS or TURAS. So when we think about HLO1, you're going to be doing some clinical SLEs, focusing on things such as safe care, safe prescribing, safe particularly in high-risk prescribing. In HLO2, we're thinking about, why do we do handover? Because we need to keep this patient safe. They can't walk onto the ward and say, oh, I don't know anything about any of these patients. That's why we do handover. It's all about keeping the patient safe so that we know, so that we can have an effective handover from one doctor to another, and also handover within our multidisciplinary teams. We need to think about our quality improvement projects, and all our foundation doctors produce fantastic quality improvement material. What we would like them to think about is, why are they doing that? Is it to improve care? Is it to improve patient safety? Is it to improve the streamlining of the service? What makes a difference? And we know that our foundation doctors, they're working right at the coalface. They see exactly what's going on in the organisations, and they're a fantastic resource to think about change, to think about improvement, and they do a huge amount of work to do this. So when they're doing their QI work, think about how are they evidencing that the patient is safe? And this thing with team working and teaching others, again, that's about developing, we can link that to patient safety, because we're teaching other people, we're teaching our students, we may be teaching our PAs and our AMPs and our nursing staff. So we're teaching other people to try and support safe clinical teams. We haven't changed anything much in HLO3, which is lifelong learning and attendance and teaching. But again, you could think if you might want to link attendance and teaching as keeping the patient safe, because you know stuff, you've learned. So that's kind of where we've gone. So nothing has changed, as you can see. We've got HLO1, 2, and 3. The FPCs underneath it. But really, when you're thinking about it, think, why am I doing this? I'm looking at the physical aspect, the mental aspect, the social aspect, but actually, how have I kept the patient safe and all of that? So that's really what we're looking at. And not every SLE will have to have patient safety through it, but I just want our foundation doctors to think about how they're evidencing it. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm not going to read this out, but really there's a statement within the curriculum that basically says that patient safety should be at the heart of doctors' working lives and should be considered at all parts of the patient journey. We do recognise that much of what happens in our organisations is high level planning, high level ward planning, service delivery, but actually our foundation doctors have a huge role to play in the safety of our culture, the safety systems and human factors in the workplace, and they are right throughout our healthcare systems and have fantastic experience. So there's an opportunity for the foundation doctor to demonstrate this at many levels, but we're not expecting them to be thinking about how am I going to actually open a hospital and deliver a safe service. It's about what they're doing in the actual at the coalface, essentially in the working environment. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, sustainability. Now, this is something our foundation doctors have welcomed. We have our foundation doctors presentation day in every year, and when we look at the huge number of fantastic posters and presentations that come to us, a significant number of these are about environmental sustainability, and we always think about inhalers and aerosols when we're doing that, but there's so much more to it, and it's fantastic to see that our foundation doctors are already doing this. So what we've asked now is for them to allow it to evidence this in their curriculum. There is lots of teaching on this. There's, health boards, trusts often have a sustainability champion, but where there isn't a sustainability champion, there is support through the UKFP site through the learning. And we want our healthcare to be sustainable. We need to think about healthcare pathways and very much patient-centred care. That's about healthcare sustainability at the foundation level. So that's what we can be doing. Sustainability is not a curriculum requirement in its own right, but when the foundation doctor is doing QI work, we would like them to think about environmental and healthcare sustainability. That way they can evidence, but it's not going to be an ARCP requirement, but it is something that should be part of their learning. And I have to say that when I have discussed this with our foundation doctors and our foundation doctor representatives, this has landed incredibly well. This is something that has been a very popular addition to the curriculum. And in fact, it threads through all curricula, all postgraduate curricula. So when they move into other postgraduate curricula, they will be continuing with that. Can I have the next slide, please? Just a little word about children and young people, and we have fantastic representation from the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, and it's important to note at the beginning that we always did encourage our foundation doctors to link any SLEs or any interactions they had with children and young people. However, our curriculum wasn't as specific or as explicit as it could have been. So we have now mentioned children and young people throughout the curriculum. Many of our, a vast, I think it's about 40% of our population are children and young people. That might not be the correct, but it's a significant number. It's important to know that you don't have to have a mandatory piece of evidence for a child. However, it's a reminder that foundation doctors can evidence the care that they have delivered to children and young people in the course of their training posts. It's important to note, particularly for any trainers that are on here or any people delivering the curriculum, not all foundation doctors need to undertake a paediatric post. And I have to say that the paediatricians on the committee were absolutely adamant that we did not have to give everybody a paediatric post, because that would be a huge commitment for them. However, foundation doctors will look after young people in surgery, emergency medicine, general practice, psychiatry and community posts. So they will see children and young people. If they want to use a clinical undertaking with one of those with a child or pediatric patient, then they can use it as evidence. But it's important to know that this is not a mandatory requirement, but it is a reflection of our society. And foundation doctors, even who do not have paediatrics, will see children in the course of their 2 years in foundation. Can I have the next slide, please? So fairer training cultures and healthcare inequalities, I've put them together. They're not the same, obviously, but I've put them together on this slide. So fairer training cultures, the GMC have a huge amount of work on fairer training cultures, and I can just signpost you to looking at the GMC website, and the work that they're doing on this is tremendous. So we need to be aware that for all of us in healthcare have equity to achieve curriculum outcomes and to be treated fairly and with equity in the workplace. Healthcare inequalities is a huge problem for us in society, and our young doctors, are right at the forefront of healthcare at the moment. And we are developing healthcare to recognise that we have significant healthcare inequalities, and are developing drivers to reduce these. And it's important that our foundation doctors start thinking about that, and we've changed some of the teaching, core teaching topics to reflect that. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so assessments. What do you need to do, and what do you need to be assessing our foundation doctors? So, as I said, there are no new SLEs, there are no new ARCP requirements. Nothing has changed. Okay, so the outcomes and the requirements remain unchanged. There are still no numbers of SLEs, and I know that will divide everyone, and people will say, I like to know what the real number is, and some people say we're quite happy with that. We are not putting any new numbers of SLEs. That doesn't change. And you don't have to specific proportion of this, or that, or the other. It's what you've done through your learning. Nothing changes. Your summary narratives, your tabs, the PSG, that all stays the same. However, when you do QI, try to thread sustainability through it, and if possible, patient safety. And I said right at the top of this slide in bold, patient safety is threaded throughout everything that a foundation doctor does. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, I'm going to give you one or two examples. For example, FPC 4. So when you open up the curriculum and what you see underneath it, so F1 behaviours, it will now say it demonstrates safe prescribing, in particular the safe prescribing of high-risk medication. It used to say demonstrates prescribing in high-risk medication. So now we put in safe prescribing. And the same for F2, and we've put in the safe prescribing there. So that hasn't changed, but what we're doing is thinking this is safe. When you're thinking about insulin, when you think about gentamicin, think about analgesics, we want these to be prescribed safely. These are particularly high-risk medications, so we've put in patient safety. So when you look at these, then this will give you a clue as to how can I link patient safety? Well, if you've prescribed insulin, then you can say, actually, I had to look at the dose and I had to do it properly. Therefore, I am obviously evidencing patient safety. So that's why that isn't there. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so FPC 5, continuity of care. So within that are F1 behaviours. It was about handover, and it said handover care effectively, verbally and in writing with due respect for confidentiality. What we've done is put in recognising that handover is core to patient safety. So there's something that you can use to say the patient is safe. And escalating concerns. I'm not going to go through every FPC, you'll be glad to know. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, and then something about sharing the vision, promotion of a safety culture in multi-professional team working. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, learning. So we need to have evidence of learning, and simulation using reporting systems, and we've got modules. There are modules such as Lead 9 for Health, which many of our foundation doctors use, and many of the patient safety modules in all 4 nations have got patient safety learning. On the next slide, please, James. Okay, simulation again is about promoting safe practice, and foundation doctors should have the opportunity to take part in this. Can I have the next slide, please? Again, I've talked about sustainability should be in the QI work. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, and this is just a statement that we have put into the curriculum about developing QI into practice with patient safety and the environmental sustainability embedded within that. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, this is what it says about quality improvement. Again, you can see that environmental sustainability is within that. So again, you can look for these. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm not going to read out the core learning, but you can see that within that, patient safety is threaded through that, just again to remind people that that is what they're doing and that is why they're doing it. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, and there's an additional statement if you want to go looking for it about the methods and the social environmental impacts of patients of QI work. Can I have the next slide, please? All right. This is something that we've put in as about population health, social justice, and tackling health inequality. This is something that we need to be looking at for the future. So it has become we've put it in for our teaching for our foundation doctors. Next slide. Okay, so really thank you for listening. You can see that there are some changes in terms of our teaching programs, but in terms of everything else, it's a different way of thinking about how you evidence, but there is nothing new. There are no new sign-offs, there are no new SLEs, and no extra work for you as foundation doctors or for trainers. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Very much, Fiona. A lovely summary of the revised curriculum, and in particular emphasising that there are no significant changes for foundation doctors to have to implement, and also that this will be introduced in August 2026, this next month, for all foundation programme doctors. Of course, our foundation programme doctors are our most important people in the foundation programme. They're the doctors of the future. And so we've asked Kavita Malhai, one of our UKFPO fellows, to come along and give some reflections on the revised curriculum. Thanks, Kavita.
Hi there, thank you so much for having me. As Mike said, my name's Kavita. I'm one of the UKFPO fellows for this year, and along with the team, I've been helping to review some of the documents surrounding the updated curriculum. And we're just going to talk through a few of the summaries from that and what it means on a practical basis for resident doctors completing their portfolios. Please, can I have the next slide? Thank you. So I'm very aware we've just had a really comprehensive summary of all of the changes, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I just wanted to give you a summary here and draw your attention to the main areas of change from our perspective. So one is just overall reassurance and reiteration that the foundation programme is once again preparing us to have a really good general basis to then proceed into whichever specialty training pathway we would like to. Again, number two would be promotion of patient safety. We know this anyway. This is central to everything we do on a day-to-day basis. It's just giving more emphasis to that in the curriculum and having it threaded through every aspect, underlining that it is in fact core to our medical practice, not only in hours, but out of hours as well. Three, the wording's been updated to recognise the fact that we do interact quite frequently with children and young people, even if we don't have dedicated paediatric placements. So as Fiona's already alluded to, she's mentioned all of the different specialties that you may interact with children in. And this is just in recognition of that you may wish to use those kind of interactions as evidence and giving a more dedicated place for that to go within the portfolio. Number four would be encouragement to include thinking about sustainability. So not just within the environmental aspect and greener initiatives and net zero plans for the NHS and that kind of thing, but also workforce sustainability, taking into account well-being and things like that as well. And particularly a place that we envision this will be useful is through your QI activities. And then finally, number 5 is updating the core teaching programme with topics to reflect current learning. So things change a lot in medicine, and to give recognition to that, we've particularly included more teaching on health inequalities and multimorbidity as our population changes. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in this section, I appreciate we've got a live audience. I'm very happy to deal with any questions there, but we just thought we'd address some of the more common ones that we've had in the discussions leading up to this webinar. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so does this change the amount of work I have to do to get down to the point? No, it doesn't. So as has been discussed already, there's still no minimum number of SLEs. This hasn't changed. There's no minimum standard that you have to achieve in terms of number or variety. But what the focus continues to be is quality pieces of evidence, a variety of different types and encounters, and consistency in terms of engagement across the year. The requirements haven't changed, the numbers haven't changed, but what has is the wording of the FPCs that you have to demonstrate with your evidence. So it's worth just having a look at how that wording has changed and ensure that the range of evidence you've selected addresses the points here. Next slide, please. Are there e-learning resources that support these revisions to the curriculum? So a little piece of work that myself and my colleague Devon, the other UKFPO fellow, have done recently is surveying foundation doctor attitudes towards the e-portfolio and which parts of it are more difficult to demonstrate, which FPCs they struggle with. We use the results of this to put together an ARCP webinar, actionable points 6 weeks beforehand, to talk about the types of evidence that you may wish to include and how best to work sort of smarter rather than harder in terms of covering all your bases. So one of the things that we discuss is that e-learning is really fantastic evidence to support all of the FPCs. And my colleague Devon has gone through and given some thought to which modules would fit within each category. And obviously the wording's changed a little bit to include greater emphasis, as we've discussed. So we've been through again and had another think about what might be helpful. I believe that QR code would take you there to the webinar if you're interested in that. But please, may we have the next slide? Fine. So I'm not going to read these out, but hopefully you'll have access to the slides afterwards. But as we've discussed, with the emphasis on mental health and children and young people, and the way that you may wish to edit your or adapt your quality improvement methodology to take into account sustainability, here are some modules that we think might be particularly useful in evidencing those parts of the curriculum, particularly, as we've said, if you're not having a lot of exposure to, for example, paediatric placements, that kind of thing. It doesn't matter. You don't have to explicitly demonstrate that, and there are other ways of demonstrating engagement, for example, using e-learning. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So where can I find more information? So as always, the UKFPO website is a really helpful repository of everything that you need to know. And also, as part of the revision to the curriculum over the last few weeks, myself, my colleague Devon, and the UKFPO team have been going through a document called the Rough Guide to the Curriculum. And it's actually a fairly comprehensive review of the whole foundation programme and what you need to do in order to successfully complete ARCP. And on that document, we've got an updated summary of how the curriculum has changed in terms of wording from the 2021 iteration and what that means in practical terms about how to make sure you're meeting all the requirements for the portfolio. I think that is our last question, but can I just see the next slide, please? Yeah, brilliant. Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much, Kavita, and thanks for answering those questions, which are all very pertinent and very clear answers. And I'd like to thank you and Devon for all your work as fellows throughout the year, and in particular for your help with the implementation of this revised curriculum. A very important group in terms of implementing any changes are our local faculty, and this is led by medical education managers throughout the UK. It was a real pleasure of mine to speak at the recent National Association of Medical Education Managers conference, and in particular about implementing the new curriculum. And so we've invited Jack Fairhall from NAMEM, who is a medical education manager in the Northwest, to come and give some thoughts about implementation of the revised curriculum on a local basis. Thanks, Jack.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. So as Mike said, my name is Jack. I'm a medical education manager working in the northwest of England. So my focus is not to repeat the curriculum changes, but is to consider what they mean from a medical education perspective, and particularly how we translate the national expectations into local delivery. Can I have the next slide, please? So for medical education teams, the trick is moving from delivering the 2021 iteration towards creating a learning culture which embeds the 2026 changes and continues to support both professional development for foundation doctors and high quality care. So the updated curriculum strengthens many themes that are already familiar to us. So things like patient safety, quality improvement, professionalism, teamwork, and so on. So the challenge is that these cannot sit as isolated topics. They need to become more visible throughout foundation training, and it is our role as medical education teams to translate the curriculum updates into practical changes. So things like how we design the foundation teaching programs, how we use simulation, how we support our supervisors, and how we create environments where foundation doctors can develop safely. And so just to echo Dr. Cameron and Dr. Malhi before me and bring in my perspective, I don't anticipate that the new nod to clinical care for children and young people, so I don't anticipate that will result in any of the foundation tracks being changed. And as we've said previously, many foundation doctors already go through paediatrics, but also they can evidence their experiences of caring for children and young people through other rotations as well, such as A&E, GP, psychiatry, etc. Can I have the next slide, please? So the foundation teaching programme is probably the strongest implementation tool that we have as medical education teams. So we are not simply looking at adding more sessions or redesigning the programme in its entirety. What we need to do is review whether our programmes reflect the behaviours we want foundation doctors to demonstrate, making tweaks and adjustments where necessary. So, for example, patient safety should not be a single session. It should be threaded throughout the teaching programme. So through things like prescribing teaching, communication skills, leadership sessions, reflection, and through simulation. Human factors and systems thinking will also need more emphasis. So deeper dive into exploring why things go wrong, how teams function under pressure, and how they can contribute to safer systems. And of course, sustainability and population health should also become part of our conversations. We're looking at a review of the foundation teaching programme with some input from subject matter experts, not an entire redesign. And it's key here to highlight that the teaching programme should complement, not replace, experiential learning. Can I have the next slide, please? So simulation provides a particularly powerful way of implementing these changes. But the important shift is moving beyond simulation as a technical exercise and realising that the clinical scenario is often just a starting point. The learning is in the human factors. For example, a deteriorating patient scenario can explore the recognition and management. Yes, of course it can, but also what was the team? So was the team communicating effectively? Did someone feel able to escalate? Were the roles clear? And did the system support safe care? And then the debrief is where we develop reflection and system thinking. And this should help foundation doctors to actively demonstrate patient safety and evidence it throughout their portfolios or within their portfolios. Can I have the next slide, please? So quality improvement is another area where medical education teams can influence implementation. The QI requirement shouldn't just be seen as engaging in a project. Instead, we should encourage foundation doctors to think about improving healthcare systems through the consideration of patient outcomes, patient safety, workforce impact, resource use, and environmental sustainability. Personally, I plan to support this by linking in with our colleagues from public health, clinical governance, and our sustainability teams. The next slide, please. And then finally, the curriculum. Thank you. Finally, the curriculum delivery depends on the people around the foundation doctor. Supervisors and clinical teams have a major influence on the learning environments. We need curriculum literacy, not only within the medical education team, but across the whole organisation. So it'd be naive to think that all foundation supervisors keep abreast of all the UKFPO bulletins, important notices and curriculum changes. So locally, we need to ensure that supervisors understand the updated expectations. We also need to strengthen our support structures, so early identification of challenges will play a crucial role and allow us to offer support. This may include peer networks, wellbeing services and reasonable adjustments. The goal is to create environments where doctors can ask for support early, rather than waiting for the 11th hour when difficulties are more significant. And the next slide, please. So what does it mean practically? So medical education teams can review and align teaching programme with the curriculum priorities. We can use simulation to develop human factors and patient safety behaviours. We can embed sustainability within quality improvement. We can support our supervisors and our faculty, and we can strengthen the networks that help foundation doctors succeed. And just to finish on, the national curriculum change, it can lead to a local culture change. Well, certainly that's the aim. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jack. A lovely reflections on how our revised curriculum can be implemented on a local level and the benefits that can be brought by doing so. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for such clear explanations of where we have got to with the revised curriculum. And I'd also like to thank those who have put questions in the chat in the Q&A panel, and we will do our best to answer those for the next few minutes. So first of all, somebody who didn't give their name, I assume they're not called anonymous, and it says, those I know in F1 have said that it's very challenging to meet the minimum attendance of in-person teaching due to ward commitments, as well as other role-related commitments. Has this been altered at all, and are there any mitigations available if you do not manage to meet this and similar minimum attendance requirements? I'll bring Jack in about this in a second, as implementation of the curriculum is a local issue, and that's where teaching lies. But from a national level, what I'd like to say is that, as far as I'm aware, there have been no foundation programme doctors who have needed an extension to training purely on the basis of not meeting teaching requirements. And these requirements have been in the curriculum since before the 2021 curriculum was introduced. And having been involved in a national level for most of that time, I'm not aware of any individual foundation doctor who has needed an extension purely on the basis of not reaching teaching requirements. Now, there will be some who have not reached the teaching requirements, but have required an extension to training to help them progress with the appropriate support, because that's one of other issues. That's one of many issues that they may have to deal with in terms of the foundation programme training. But whilst I know people are worried about achieving the minimum time, as I say, as far as I'm aware, this has never been the case that that's the only reason that someone's needed an extension. However, nonetheless, we do appreciate that as foundation programme doctors, there are pressures on people to try and ensure that they can get to teaching. But Jack, perhaps you can comment about ways that medical education managers can help to ensure that people reach their minimum teaching commitments.
Yeah, so I'll put just a hand up initially, because I'm a slight outlier in the Northwest. We have slightly different teaching expectations that's set by our regional foundation school. So we have perhaps slightly more than the 30 hours, or the core teaching. So we normally provide 4 hours of foundation teaching per doctor per week within the Northwest, and I appreciate that might be different to other areas of the four nations. So I think really it's when teaching is scheduled. So I think what we've seen within medical education is if it's scheduled during a lunchtime period for 1 or 2 hours, we often find that foundation doctors, and actually not just foundation doctors, that other doctors, if looking at other programs, don't always get there because they are kind of tied up on the wards, that they're not always released, and they're with patients and things like that. However, if you can organise the teaching as a medical education department at the beginning of the day, that's what we do within the hospital that I currently work in. You get not quite full attendance, but you get very good attendance for foundation doctors. They don't go onto the wards beforehand, they don't get caught up, and therefore they're able to teach their attend teaching programmes.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, and it is very much a local issue, and programmes will be organised locally. But we know that there are some examples around the country of excellent teaching programmes which have very, very good attendance rates. And if there is an issue, the mitigation is to go and speak to your training programme director at your trust, to talk to your educational supervisor, to talk to the medical education manager like Jack, or talk to your foundation school director. And there are lots of examples around the country of where there have been issues that this has been dealt with very speedily in order to ensure that foundation programme doctors do get to their teaching. It's all probably worth saying at this moment, and this is very much in the curriculum, that of course most of the learning that we do as doctors is through our clinical practice, dealing with patients and developing our skills that way. But nonetheless, it is important that core teaching programmes attendance is possible. On the same sort of note, this is a question for Fiona. Do the suggested e-learning for health modules count towards core learning, or is this considered non-core learning?
Thank you very much. And so the e-learning for health modules, which are dedicated to foundation, have been created based on the curriculum, so they will be core learning. There are obviously a lot of e-learning for health modules which are not linked, set in the foundation, but if you do any of that, then that's non-core learning. These e-learning for health modules have been updated, or are in the process of being updated, to reflect this updated curriculum. So more will be available for you to review, but they don't replace face-to-face teaching. They're there to complement and supplement face-to-face teaching, but they are not there. When I say face-to-face, it could be on Teams like this, but direct learning, but they're not there to replace, but they're there to complement. But yes, they are generally will count towards core learning, but anything else that you do is non-core. But I think what you need to do is look at what the topic is, and if the topic is within the curriculum, then it's core learning.
Yes, we've published that list of core teaching topics, and indeed have revised that slightly, only slightly, but very slightly, for this revision of the curriculum. If you can say that you've done some learning on those sorts of things, then that's core learning. I think going to teaching as opposed to doing it all entirely by e-learning, there's something about the socialization of going to teaching, of talking to your colleagues, being in a safe space with them. And that's why many teaching programs still persist rather than it all being done entirely by e-learning. Another question for Fiona now, and this is a very important one. I'm a less than full-time trainee due to complete foundation programme training in a few months. I have a nearly complete portfolio mapped to the current objectives. Does this mean that the portfolio will reset on Horus, or indeed Churas, the e-portfolio in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland? And will I need to entirely remap to the new objectives? So first of all, does it mean that the portfolios will reset?
My understanding is that the portfolios will not reset, and that as a less than full-time foundation doctor, as with anybody else who's out of sync for any other reason, the portfolio won't reset. All the work that you've done, so well done for having your portfolio nearly ready with a few months to go. So that's excellent. Nothing will change for you. What I would like you to think about, though, anyone from August, anything that you put into your portfolio, think about patient safety, environmental sustainability, but you don't need to, you won't have to relink everything. That's the good news, is what you've got stays, but anything else that you put in, have a nod to the updated curriculum. And because these are not specific, the ARCP requirements don't change. You need SLEs, you need all the different things that are already established, but the content is evolving. So it's a different way of thinking about it. It would be nice if you do another SLE and you think, I'm going to stick something with patient safety. That'd be nice. But no, it will not reset, and you won't have to remap everything. So that's good news.
And we do fully understand that any change can cause anxiety and worry, and that's why we're doing this webinar, and Kavita and colleagues have helped produce other materials for people. It's why I've been going, and Fiona has been going to do some talks at various different meetings to try and reassure people that that's a very important message. That if you're already on the curriculum and you've obtained the evidence that you need to satisfy the curricular outcomes, then there should be no issues at all. So the final question that's come in is patient safety. If patient safety is now being focused on more, which is very important, and there is acknowledgement of resident doctors seeing children, why is safeguarding training not obligatory? Fiona.
That's a very good question, actually. And you know, you could argue that safeguarding should be mandatory within the curriculum. However, we can't mandate any specific requirements such as safeguarding and any courses or anything. We can't mandate that. However, safeguarding is very often, and certainly children's child protection, which I think is what you're alluding to, is usually one of the statutory and mandatory requirements of your trust. And actually, if you are seeing children in any part of your work, and that doesn't matter whether you've got a paediatric job or not, I don't have a paediatric job. I have to do statutory and mandatory training in safeguarding and child protection. So it's for all of us, and it's more of an organisational requirement rather than a curriculum requirement. But obviously, if you've been to it, put it in your curriculum. But yes, it is a mandatory requirement, but not necessarily sitting within the foundation portfolio and within the curriculum.
Thank you, Fiona. I completely agree. Certainly in the organisation that I do my clinical work, it is absolutely a requirement to do safeguarding training. I'm sure it's the same in all organisations everywhere, depending upon which sort of patients you come into contact with. And I think the key challenge with that sort of mandatory training is to make it relevant to the people, and that's how to the people who are taking it. And sometimes we do mandatory training because we have to, whereas actually we should be doing it because it's really relevant. And I guess just with the benefit of sort of 30 plus years of being a doctor, it's not always until you're in clinical practice that you realize what's really important, and safeguarding is very, very important, not just for children but also for adults as well, but it's often not until you're confronted with it that you realize the importance of it. So we would appeal to people when they're doing the mandatory training about safeguarding to think about how it is relevant to them, and how they can put that into practice when they're working as a doctor. Another question has just come in from Adam in Wales. A question for Jack. Really interested in timing of teaching, morning foundation doctor teaching. Doesn't this interfere with or clash with ward rounds? And does that make it a struggle to implement locally?
So possibly is the answer there. So again, within my hospital, we run teaching. It's a full day teaching. We have foundation teaching, and when I started here, it used to take place once a month, and now it's kind of once every week. Now we have foundation teaching kind of running kind of for a full day. So yes, it possibly does, but what we've found, certainly at the trust that I work, is that the hospital is now aware that the foundation doctors are going to be just absent for that period of time, and so just plan their clinical services, with that in mind.
And I think that's a really important message for those designing teaching programs. It's thinking about how it fits in with the clinical service, but also making sure that the importance of the teaching program is emphasised. It's not secondary, it's just something different. But working with rota coordinators, those who plan the clinical service, is very important in designing an education program.
That's why we don't have foundation teaching running on a Monday or a Friday as well, because we know the clinical demand is higher.
And those sorts of things are really important in terms of designing programs. It needs some thought and some sort of working together, which you could say is all of clinical practice, really. So it doesn't need that. But as I said, there are lots of examples, really good examples of teaching programs, both regionally and locally around the country. And I'm sure if you ask your local foundation schools, they could give you some examples of things that have worked. I'm going to bring the webinar to an end now, but I'd like to thank Jack, Fiona and Kavita for giving up their time and doing such excellent presentations. In terms of the implementation of the revised foundation programme curriculum, I'd really like to thank the team led by Kate Tansley at the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. I'd like to thank Kavita and Devon, our fellows, for their help with writing the guidance and webinars such as this. All the stakeholders, and there were a lot who fed back about our revised curriculum. We tried to incorporate as many of your comments into the revision as we possibly can. And I'd like to finish by particularly thanking Kata Varnai from the UKFPO, who has put in hours and hours and hours of work in ensuring that the curriculum is ready for implementation next month. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like for those of you watching the recording, thanks for watching. I hope this was useful, and good luck with the implementation of the revised curriculum in August 2026.